All right. You heard the Game of Thrones music. That could only mean Fantasy, Fire, and Ice, brought to you by Sportstopia, is here for your Week 4 recap. Week 4 almost in the books. Another good one, I guess, depending on which side you are on. So let's start here. If you are a Cincinnati Bengals stockholder, I mean, you drafted a bunch of their offense before your fantasy leagues got going, you're bankrupt right now. They are not doing well. And one of our experts, he called it. Take a listen.
Quarterback in fantasy this week that you guys are just completely out on, that you're just willing to completely fade. Like, no matter what happens, he's a fade for me.
Joe Burrow against Tennessee. I got as quarterback 21 on my rankings. You can find those at sportstopia.io as well. Quarterback 21, Joe Burrow. We just haven't seen it yet, and he's also got a tough defensive line to go up against in Tennessee. Everyone's like, well, if he's not going to do it against Tennessee, who's he going to do it against? But they forget the front end that the Tennessee defensive line brings to the table. And Burrow, if he's not 100%, I'm just not ready yet to kind of commit to having him as a consistent piece in my lineups. That would be my one at quarterback.
Who they think gonna beat them Bengals? The answer is everyone. Everyone is gonna beat them Bengals right now if they're playing this bad, and they are playing very bad. We're gonna get more into that during the show, but listen to Cody. Look at his rankings at sportstopia.io, and unfortunately, bench Burrow. Okay, moving on to an actually good offense. The Eagles played the Commanders yesterday in a shootout. If you saw that one coming, you had better foresight than I did. But actually, one of our guys, Terrell Furman, he might have seen it coming. And if you listen to him, you might have a fatter wallet today. Take a listen.
Commanders got destroyed by the Buffalo Bills 37-3, and now this week they are 8.5-point dogs at Philadelphia. Now, not only did the Philadelphia Eagles lose this game to the Commanders last year in Philly, but Ron Rivera is very, very good as an underdog. He's 33-25-1 as an underdog on the road, and he's also 15-9-1 as an underdog of 7 or more points. Last year they were able to create turnovers and get the win. Can they do it this year? Are you backing or are you fading the Close Your Eyes special this week?
Hope you backed it. Well, before we even get to that, the best part of that was that sultry music in the background. I picture Terrell just vibing while he's putting in his bets and making money. Not only did the Commanders cover, but they could have won. If you saw the game, there was a questionable call on Terry McLaurin there at the end. I guess if you step on somebody's forearm, that doesn't count as stepping into the field. But they covered. They could have won. Ron Rivera fights for your money, and for that, I know us and Terrell Furman, we salute you, Coach Rivera. Thank you very much. Okay, so that game was a shootout. It was a fun one in overtime, especially if you were an Eagles fan. Unfortunately, though, nobody scored 70 points this week. That's kind of a bummer, I guess. We're not going to see 10 touchdowns every week. But one of the breakout players from that Miami Dolphins offense last weekend, even though the Dolphins lost, one of them kept it rolling despite our own monotone bet's best efforts. Here's what he had to say.
Devon Achane, you think you can go back to him?
I'm not. I mean, the guy is fast, and we know this team loves speed, right? That is the goal right there. They want as much speed as possible. They lead the league, and they have all top 5 fastest ball carriers of the season, right? Achane, I think, is number 4, Mostert's number 2, and Tyreek is like 1 and 3. It's insane. This team loves speed. The question is, how can you reliably get fantasy points from that? I don't know if the path is there. How much in a real game, right? Not a game where they're up 50 points, not a game where you're crushing the opponent. How many times is Devon Achane going to touch the ball? He was a healthy scratch in week 1. For me, I'm thinking 5 to 7 touches. Maybe he gets a little bit more involved later on in the season. But at this point in the year, it's a little bit too early. I'm not going to be playing any Achane in fantasy or DFS this week.
Did you know Devon Achane has been doing so well that he's actually correcting people that his last name is now Achane? That's what happens when you score 6 touchdowns in 2 weeks. Now, here's a couple of things that Monotone nailed. He said he was going to get, what, 6, 7, 8 touches? Well, he had 8 rushes for over 100 yards. He's making the most of that. So again, Monotone is in this half and half where he's not going to play him, but he should have because he's tearing up the field right now. But here's where Monotone is tearing it up, because we've got to give credit where credit is due on this show. If you have been paying attention to the Broncos, I'm sorry, because they're not exactly the best watch, but he nailed, let's pull up the tweet, his prediction, he nailed the Jaleel McLaughlin anytime touchdown plus 800. Knowing him, I'm sure he put like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 on that. He's rolling in cash over there with all his winning bets. He nailed that one. Of course, McLaughlin getting some more run thanks to the Javonte injury there. But plus 800 is plus 800. So Devon Chain, no. Jaleel McLaughlin, yes. Monotone will send you off with the victory there. Okay, so finally, for us old guys here, right? We remember when the New England Patriots were good. Those days are not now. That day was not yesterday. But our own Steezy A. Smith, he thought it could be when he was making his predictions going into the weekend.
Which game I want to highlight between the four that we've talked about so far? I like New England to cover against Dallas. I think right now, 7.5, if I heard correctly, that's a little too much for me.
Sitting down there
6.5.
Yeah.
Right, just about a touchdown. That's still a little too much for me. I think New England, with how pesky they have been, especially defensively, and I know they did pose problems for Philadelphia's offense in week 1. I think they could probably do the same against the Dallas Cowboys in week 4. I still expect Dallas to come out as the victor, but by about a touchdown, I think it's going to be a closer game than that.
All right, so he if we had cut it off just before he said he said about a touchdown. Well, it wasn't a touchdown, 38-3, a drubbing. The Cowboys just embarrassed the New England Patriots. Mac Jones got pulled. Bill Belichick is wondering where all of his good players are, and everybody in South Boston is just yelling, "Tommy, come back, please." I actually kind of think 45-year-old Tom Brady, he might be able to sling it around better than Jones, but that's a discussion for another time. Okay, so if you follow along with Sportstopia, you know we have this tool, the Contrarian Edge Optimizer, and you might be wondering, does this thing work? I mean, is this worth it? Should I even try it out? Well, here's a little bit of proof. Our fearless leader, Daryl Snyder, we've talked about him splitting a Millie Maker not once, not twice, but I want to say almost 3 times. I think we have his latest tweet. He didn't split the top prize, but I believe he came in second yesterday, and he took down, what is that, $11,804. The man does not get excited about these amounts of money because he's just so used to winning, and he's using the Contrarian Edge Optimizer to help him do it, help him set his lineups. Look, I, for one, would like to wake up with an extra 11 grand. And if the Contrarian Edge Optimizer helps me do it, then that's worth every penny. Where can you find that? Sportstopia.io. You can take it for a test drive if you're still not sure. It can help you set your DFS lineup, especially as we head into this big Monday night football. So we'll get to that. We'll get to some Edge Optimizer picks. And also on Sportstopia.io, you don't have to listen to me ramble on about all these near hits and these misses. You can actually read about my studs and duds every Monday from Sunday's action. You can check that out at Sportstopia.io with all of our rankings and all of our experts. And speaking of experts, I want to bring in the smart guys right now because enough of my rambling and joking. So let's bring in the Joe Burrow hater himself, Cody Carpentier, and Mr. High-Low, Mark Garcia. Guys, welcome. I hope it was a good Sunday to you. I don't think any of us are having as good of a Sunday as Daryl, or a good 1.5 week span where he just cannot lose these Millie Makers. Like, I mean, this guy is absolutely on fire. So we'll get to some of those picks. Mark, I know you got some thoughts about the Monday Night Football game, but I want to talk about the game we all most recently watched. That was the game from last night. You might have heard about it. It was Sunday Night Football. There was a big star in attendance. The guy who plays Kendall from Succession, I believe, was there. You know, I think that was the biggest. He was the biggest star there. And it was the Jets and the Chiefs. So let's start. The Chiefs win that game. You guys just slid into our show like Patrick Mahomes sliding down at the goal line before he was going to run in for a touchdown and cover the spread for all of you marks out there who took all of the public who took the Chiefs to wallop the Jets Didn't end up happening like that. It was a smart football play. But let's talk about those New York Jets. And Cody, I want to specifically start with the man who was slinging the rock last night, Zach Wilson. I tweeted out, I am not ready for the Zach Wilson redemption story. Am I going to have to see this redemption narrative play out the rest of the season, or is this a fluke?
I mean, doesn't it make sense that on the same weekend, Justin Fields has a good game, Zach Wilson also has a good game up until the last time they touched the football? And the last time they touched the football was a fumble for Zach Wilson and a pick for Justin Fields. And like, I think that all it did is it showed that there is still room for these guys to grow in these offenses. You look at Zach Wilson's charts over at Next Gen Stats. In week 1, he only had one pass go more than 15 yards down the field. The last 2 weeks, it was 6. This week, it was 9. He was efficient for the majority part of the game. What really irked me in this game was seeing them pull to 2020 in the third quarter, right after that first drive of the second half. They pulled it to 2020, and you're playing against Patrick Mahomes. I was doing a podcast during this game, and I was like tilting for the Chiefs, tilting for the Jets fans, because you're seeing them pull up, and this defense has got the momentum, and the offense is looking competent, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, let's just hand the ball off to Dalvin Cook here, because we know he's not efficient this year. And then let's throw the ball to Randall Cobb underneath. When you have these guys like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and Elazar looking efficient on the field, just go 3 and out. Yeah, we can just punt the ball, give the ball back to Patrick Mahomes. He's not playing good right now. And then, he'll just punt it back to us, and we'll go 3 and out again, punt it back and forth, because we know Patrick Mahomes is just going to go 3 and out the rest of the football game, right? Like, they just completely pulled the levers back and said, no, we're cool sitting here 2020 for as long as possible. And as you saw, as the game waned, Kansas City finally found their stride at the end. They got a field goal, and if they needed to at the end of the game, they could have scored a touchdown. So really, it's I don't blame Zach Wilson for the loss. He did have the turnover late, but I blame the play calling really, and how he played in that first half. First half and the first drive of the third quarter, you kind of just had to keep leaning into it to see what happened. But as far as your actual question is, are we going to see a redemption tour for Zach Wilson really coming on? I'm not quite there.
Mark, how about you? I mean, Zach Wilson, was this a fluke? I mean, was this just because he was trying to impress Taylor Swift? He knew it was there. I know.
Donna Kelsey.
Yeah, Donna Kelsey. He was also in attendance. And Aaron Rodgers was there, looking like Yosemite Sam with his mustache and all that. Like, I mean, was this just the moment, right? I believe hype is real. You get up for big games. Like, I buy into all of that. So is that what we saw last night? Or if you're in a Superflex league, let's say, Zach Wilson's on the waiver wire, maybe, he's 3% owned, I think, across some of these Yahoo formats, last I checked. Is this a guy you consider putting on the bench if you have, I don't know, Deshaun Watson or maybe, I don't know why you'd have Tannehill. Maybe you have Tannehill. I don't know. Is this a guy you consider in fantasy formats in the weeks ahead?
The short answer is no. The long answer is actions are going to be worth way more than words. And the words that we're getting out of New York right now from Robert Saleh, from Nathaniel Hackett, are that this guy is our quarterback. Zach Wilson's our dude. He's going to lead us to the promised land. When you look at their actions, and last night that was a great breakdown by Cody. They are not confident in Zach Wilson when it matters most. And so they're going to rest on their laurels. They're going to take things easy. They're going to allow their defense to keep them in games. When you're playing Patrick Mahomes, you kind of have to have this go for the jugular mentality, right? Like, they needed to be scoring points on their own and not allowing or trying for their defense just to allow or to keep them in the game. And we kind of saw how that worked out. So, like, actions speak much louder than the words in this situation. The words are great. The words are like, Zach Wilson's our guy. The actions are, we don't trust him when it matters most.
Well, I mean, he has to be their guy right now. Like, that's some of that is just like, he has to be the guy right now. And so we're going to say he's our guy. We're going to back him. You mentioned resting on not Zach Wilson, but resting on their laurels in other ways. I do want to say, Mark, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. We're about to see, at least I feel like we're about to see prime Breece Hall come back, right? We're about to see a Breece Hall explosion. Did I get that? Did you get the same read watching the game and actually looking at his snap percentage go up the past few weeks?
Oh yeah, I mean they're about static if you look at kind of where he's been. They are not giving him a full workload just yet. I mean, he had 6 carries last night, 3 targets. But this is a guy who is one of the most explosive pieces, not just running backs, pieces in the entire National Football League. At some point, they're going to have to, and I think they kind of backed themselves into a corner too, because when they went out and signed Dalvin Cook for the contract that they gave him, they almost have to use him. Which is unfortunate. And we kind of see the efficiency split. I mean, they're both running behind the same offensive line. They're both getting similar situational carries. And Breece Hall is making that one cut, that one read, and exploding upfield. Dalvin Cook is taking 17 steps in the backfield and not making a decision. But the fact that they paid him the contract that they did is kind of troubling for this team because they're almost forced to continue using him, or else they're saying that they made a mistake. And one thing NFL coaches do not want to do, GMs do not want to do, is admit 3 weeks into the season or 4 weeks into the season that they made a mistake.
Yeah, the Dalvin Cook. Look, I think it's popular to say lately, this is the phrase I've seen, it looks like he's running in jeans. I don't even know if I'd give him jeans. It looks like he's like just tethered to the field. Like he just does not look like the guy that we've seen before. Cody, other offensive weapons, and then I want to get to the Chiefs. But does last night give you a little more hope for guys like Garrett Wilson or Lazard in that offense?
Garrett Wilson to a certain extent, just because we know what the talent is and the targets are going to continue to funnel there. We've seen that from Zach Wilson to Garrett Wilson. Lazard looks good. I love to see him defend a quarterback, Zach Wilson, after the game in the press conference. Like that shows that, he's at least on his team and therefore the tight end position. There was 8 targets to Conklin and Ruckert last night for a combined 84 yards. I didn't mind that, but I just don't see the consistency there across the position just because they have those 2 guys as well as CJ Uzama. But I did want to add in also with the thing you mentioned about Breece Hall. Like last week he had 3 negative plays. This week he only had 1, including that long run. And he looked more like himself. And then, of course, you mentioned the breakout coming. It just happens to be that they play against the Denver Broncos next week, who have allowed, I think,
the get-right team. The get-right team.
521 rushing yards the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, it's kind of a good situation.
Yeah, I think eventually, I mean, sooner rather than later, it's going to be the Breece Hall show, and then Dalvin will come in and get his 6 touches, maybe. That's what I'm hoping for. Anyway, that's as a Breece Hall owner, that's what I'm hoping to see. On the other side of the ball, now listen. Remember last week when I asked if the Jaguars stunk? I mean, they go to London, didn't exactly put on a great show, but they get the win against a team that might stink more than them. But here's where we get real nuts, okay? The Chiefs at 3-1. I am not impressed. You talked about Mahomes not playing that great. You go back to last season compared to this season. You go look at his receivers, what they were doing through 4 weeks. I think his highest receiver is Watson, who has 165 yards or something like that, which is a bad game for some receivers in the league. And that's through 4 weeks. Are the Chiefs like the worst 3-1 team in the league right now? Or am I just doubting Patrick Mahomes' raw talent here, Cody? Am I just being the Mahomes hater and it's all going to blow up in my face?
I just scrolled through all the 3-1 teams, and to answer your question, it's definitely Tampa Bay or them, right? Tampa Bay's actually looked, they've exceeded expectations this year, and they've looked somewhat competent. But also, like what we're waiting for Kelce to really get 100%. He doesn't look like he's quite up to that 100% threshold that we want to see out of him running the snap share and having the Travis Kelce game. It kind of happened in college. It's kind of off tangent, but Brock Bowers finally had the big Brock Bowers game. You'll hear about him down the line, but that's like what we're waiting for. Travis Kelce is like, okay, when's Travis Kelce 2023 going to pop out here? And when he's not popping, it's like, well, who's the next receiver? And that's kind of why everyone's worried about these Kansas City Chiefs. Is it actually going to be Rashee Rice, the rookie out of SMU? I don't know. The 3rd leading receiver on the team was Noah Gray, who had 1 reception in the game. And then the number 2 leading receiver was Isaiah Pacheco, who had the best game out of everybody, which is the running back. He almost had 160 yards on the ground. So as far as underwhelming goes, they are to a certain extent, but I do think that Patrick Mahomes, what you saw last night is he still does have the ability to turn it on whenever he needs to.
And I mentioned that slide at the beginning of the game where they could have covered the spread. Had the Jets not go down, they would have They could have gone down and scored, and it'd been a different game. So that would have elevated his fantasy points. Obviously, he gets that rushing touchdown. But that also would have swung millions of dollars. And the public was all over the Chiefs last night in that game. That was like a hundreds of millions of dollars slide there for Patrick Mahomes. And so, Mark, on Mahomes, here's where I'm going to get crazy. Like, I'm not kidding. I'm going to get crazy. If you are a Patrick Mahomes fantasy owner, okay, and you've been listening to us here at Sportstopia, and a couple weeks ago, you might have gone out and gotten CJ Stroud, and maybe he's your backup to Mahomes, right? Would you, and now this, I'm nuts, okay?
Don't say
Would you trade in fantasy Patrick Mahomes if you could get a big name back? Because I'm not seeing the 5,000-yard guy from last year. Am I crazy if I throw that out in my league? And I'm talking about a big name. Like, I'm talking about a wide receiver 1 or an RB1. I'm talking about a name. I'm not just talking about just a guy. Is that nuts?
I am personally not going there. And this is
that's
still
why
an
I'm
offense.
going to win the league, Mark. That's why I'm going to win the league.
This is still an offense that is working through what they are going to be this year. You kind of see the snap rates at wide receiver. They're not. They're still feeling their way out through the season, and obviously, this is a coaching staff and a quarterback that have Super Bowl aspirations, that have been there before and kind of know what that looks like and feels like. And they're kind of, I mean, they're a 3-1 team. They're not like, it's not all doom and gloom at this point, but they're still trying to work through what they want to be on offense. So at some point they're going to figure that out. It's going to click, and I think that we're going to see more condensed snaps amongst the wide receivers. But yeah, at this point, Patrick Mahomes, what he's able to do on a football field, nobody else can do. So I'm not pushing the panic button just yet.
I'm not panicking, but I certainly will sound dumb when they go back to the Super Bowl. I can't wait for that moment. All right, moving on. Cody, you mentioned another guy who, to be honest, when I write my weekly recap column, I wasn't going to bet I was going to write on him after what we saw the first 3 weeks. But Justin Fields yesterday, 335 yards, 4 touchdowns. But I mean, it was against who was it against? The very super talented defense out in Denver, the Denver Broncos. So is this a fluke from Fields? I mean, I know a lot of people expected this leap, okay? And maybe this is the stat line you were hoping for more often than not. Didn't do much in the rushing department. That was his upside there. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot in the rushing department. So when you look at yesterday, and there's other Bears on there too, what did you think of that? Is this the turning the corner for the Bears offense and Justin Fields? Or is this just, hey, the Broncos let up 70 last week, so they might as well let up this to this guy?
I think if we weren't talking about the Broncos being the team that he did it against, I think you might have a little more positive thoughts from people across the industry. But I think from what we saw from Fields for the first 3 quarters, it was pretty good. He was 12 for 12 at one point, 185 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was going into halftime. Again, he hasn't had 3 total touchdowns the entire season passing. He completed 11 passes the week before and only had 99 yards the week before. So it was really just like the polar opposite of what we had seen. We saw the flashes, and I tweeted at one point yesterday, I was like, if y'all wondered what the MVP Fields looked like, you just saw it. Like, he had the most bets before the season as far as being the MVP. There's a reason why. You just saw the flash in the pan, but then you also saw at the end of the game the 2 turnovers that ended up costing the Bears the win. So as far as him, again, in the same realm as Zach Wilson, like as far as him doing this on a consistent basis, I'd love to see it, against the Washington defense this week. That is much better. I know they've lost to the Buffalo Bills 37-3 2 weeks ago, but they played Philadelphia strong, and that front is daunting, and I think a lot more daunting than what Denver brings to the table. They also got a divisional matchup with Minnesota coming, the Chargers also. So I think there's some matchups there where if he can couple these together, you maybe see some I don't know. I'm trying.
Oh, you don't want to go there.
I'm trying to sell myself. I'm trying to sell myself on this.
You don't want to go there. Well, but I hear you about the schedule, though. I mean, look, you got Commanders, Vikings, Raiders, Chargers all coming up. I mean, these are teams that let up points. We just saw it all weekend. These are teams that let up points. So, Mark, you not only Fields, but you go to the other guys that balled out yesterday, and you look at Cole Kmet. Welcome back. Thanks. Nice to see you again. DJ Moore. I call it the DJ Moore experience because the guy can do it. It's just that he doesn't consistently do it. And then you have Khalil Herbert, who showed up after he heard all of the eventually he's going to get replaced. He's going to get replaced, which he still could. So you look at these fantasy assets on this Bears roster, and then you look at the next month. Are you buying these guys?
Yeah, I think you should be. And Cole Kmet specifically, he's a guy who's still in a route 95.5%. His route participation 95.5%. That's ranks 5th in the league. So he's a kind of a player that is likely to go as this offense goes. If they see success, he's going to be a very fantasy relevant tight end moving forward. And the other aspect about this offense in particular is like they're getting more condensed. I mean, Equanimeous St. Brown stepped in after being inactive the first 3 weeks, played 60% of the offensive snaps, and that was because Chase Claypool was inactive for this game. So there's reports that they're trying to admit that they were wrong with Chase Claypool, and they're shopping him for a 5th or a 6th rounder. You don't see that very often, and we just got done talking about that with the Jets. You don't see a team this early in the season admitting that they were wrong. And so with that kind of taken into context of this offense, it is a highly concentrated offense. I mean, Roschon Johnson in neutral to positive game script played 78% of the offensive snaps this past week. So if this offense is going to be only DJ Moore, Justin Fields, Roschon Johnson, and Cole Kmet, there's going to be fantasy upside there.
And again, if you're looking at a team, right, like let's say you're 0-4 or 1-3 in your fantasy league, and you look at that offense, or you look at that schedule coming up in the next month. I mean, there are opportunities there to get points. We got a question. Hey guys, do you answer fantasy questions? Of course we do. I don't know if I'm going to give you the right answer, but these guys might. So we'd love to have them in the chat. Fire away if you have any chat questions. Look, I want to move on to the team on the other side of the ball. We don't have to talk about the Broncos defense. I think at this point for me, if I see the Broncos on anybody's schedule, I'm going to feel pretty confident starting an offense against them. I think Sean Payton, his comments about how bad the Broncos were last season are blowing up in his face because they're not exactly lighting the world on fire. But I will say, I mean, Russ is kind of cooking, right? Russ Wilson is kind of cooking. I mean, certainly compared to what we saw last season. But the story coming out of yesterday was really the running back situation there, right? Javonte Williams leaves the game with a hip injury, not believed to be that serious, but a guy like Jaleel McLaughlin comes in who was already on at least people, at least fantasy radars here for Sportstopia. So he's a guy that some people could have gone out and gotten already. But if he's on the waiver wire, Cody, are you buying McLaughlin being an RB replacement on your team? And before we even get to that, I want to say Joshua Kelly, if you spent fab money on him, you're probably not thrilled. Jerome Ford, if you spent fab money on him, I don't know if you're thrilled right now. I know he had that 2 touchdown game right after, but it's not like he's not really tearing it up yet. So like, is McLaughlin a guy that you would recommend going to get, Cody?
I'm definitely going to go and get him. I like McLaughlin. He had 4 touchdowns in the preseason this last year. We always see these guys in the preseason that kind of pop. Mike Boone is one of the stalwarts of preseason football over the last 5-10 years, and he never really put together in the season. Now, McLaughlin had 4 touchdowns in the preseason. He's 5'9", 187 pounds, ran a 4.51, and he's upper 90th percentile in a college dominator. Yes, he went to Youngstown State, but also, yes, those numbers are eerily similar to Austin Eckler being 5'9", 187 pounds. Eckler's 10 pounds heavier. Again, not comparing the two, just saying these things align very well. In this game this week, Samaje Perine had 19 snaps in the backfield. McLaughlin had 15. I like McLaughlin. 105 yards and a touchdown in this game. They used him in the passing game. He has burst. He has explosion. I talked about him 2 weeks on Patreon on my Undercovered Ops show about being just a guy you need to stash away because, and again, it kind of worked out this way, but it was also a different injury. Was last year you saw with J.K. Dobbins how he came back early. He left because he had a knee injury. The knee injury flamed back up, and he was gone for a while. This year, Javonte Williams had the same knee surgery. It ends up being a hip injury that makes him go out for a couple weeks. But I like McLaughlin next to Samaje Perine. I think he's going to be the burstier of the two, and I think he's going to be a value. I'm not going to go out and spend Ford or Kelly money on him in fab, but I already added him in a few spots, so I'm happy already.
Well, Cody, of course you did. You got the crystal ball there. You're adding everybody before anybody else can get them. So you're going after McLaughlin. I mean, I don't think there's even if Williams or even if Javonte's injury is minor, right? We're at least seeing the potential of McLaughlin here, and to maybe not a Dolphin situation where you're going to get both guys run, but the potential is there. We see it. All right. So here's the fantasy question. This is from George Play 01. I want to add Jameson Williams, who's coming back. His suspension was reduced. Keaton Mitchell and Jake Ferguson. Who should I drop? Tyler Algier, Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now, I already know one of these drops. I think we all are going to say which one we should drop right off the bat. And his name might start with Dalvin and it might end with Cook. So, guys, I'm wondering, so we're adding Jameson Williams, Keaton Mitchell, and Jake Ferguson. Who should I drop? So we're looking for 3 guys to drop here. Are we in consensus? We're dropping Dalvin Cook here?
Dalvin and Kareem Hunt are the top 2 to go.
Is he trying to drop 3? Is that what he's trying to do? Obviously,
is it? Yeah, I think he's trying to add all 3, so he's trying to drop 3 here. I think he's trying to drop 3, and from the looks of it, I think you can basically swap. You're swapping the 2 running backs there, right? We're dropping the 2 running backs, Dalvin Cook and Kareem Hunt. I mean, I to be honest, I thought Kareem Hunt could just waltz right in there and take his job back. I guess it's not what's going to happen there. So you're probably good there. And then out of the other 3, I mean, are we still riding the Algier wave here?
Yeah, I mean, process of elimination, you're not dropping Deontay Johnson or JSN ever. So it's basically between Tyler Algier and Jalen Warren. And I'm personally I'm not dropping anything, but if I were to drop, and it'd probably be for Jake Ferguson if you needed help at tight end, or Keaton Mitchell, you might not even need to add here. You're probably just adding Jameson Williams and Jake Ferguson and not adding Keaton Mitchell. Yeah.
And wait a week or 2 and see, things come up. I don't think Keaton's going to get a role ASAP.
Well, yeah. and you, sir, you're saying waiting on both of them there. Jameson Williams too. You want to, Cody, I think you mentioned earlier in the season when I think we were heading into the season or week 1, you want to see it from this guy, right? I mean, 1 catch for a touchdown last year does not make a fantasy stud. So are we waiting and seeing there, Cody, on Jameson Williams?
What did Dan Campbell? He just had a press conference this morning, and he said something about Jameson Williams. I believe it was like something about we just got to fix the small things, or we just got to stay on the small things. And it's like when we've seen Dan Campbell come out numerous times and be like, "Yep, he's just it's this. Yep, it's this. Yep, it's that." It's like you don't want to see that as a fantasy owner for a guy with this talent that may have on or off field issues. We don't know. I don't really. Not my problem. That's Detroit's problem. The thing that I'm looking at is that there's guys on this team like Josh Reynolds that are competent and that are very professional receivers in the NFL, that it's going to take a little bit for Jameson Williams to just get the role. So I love Jameson's talent, but it's kind of like I talked about it with Bateman before the season. It's like I'm at like strike number 4 and we're getting there with Jameson too.
Yeah, I dropped him heading into this past weekend right before the suspension was announced that it was being reduced, and I don't regret it. Like I always say, like, is this really this wide receiver 1 is just going to come off the bench here and just step right onto the field, and all of a sudden he's Justin Jefferson or so, and like I want to see it first. I don't regret dropping him. So there we go. I appreciate the question there, George Play 1. We're dropping Cook like a bad habit. Probably should have been dropped a long time ago. And we're dropping Kareem Hunt, and we're going after the guys there. And shout out Jake Ferguson. He had a good game. I mean, he had a he's I don't know if he's the best tight end around, but he's doing well there for Big D. All right. So let's move on because and I'll get to some other questions in the chat when we get to the Monday Night Football game. But the theme seems to be defensively, they're a mess, but there are some good players. So I want to move on to another mess. And the Raiders are a mess. Okay. The Raiders are messier than the Las Vegas Bachelorette right now. I mean, like, this is not a good situation there. I mean, it's just not. But you got a guy, Josh Jacobs, our rushing leader last year has a great game yesterday. And week 4 last year, you could argue, was the time he started ascending also, until when he gets to that rushing title. So Josh Jacobs is a perfect example of a good player on a bad team. Mark, I want to start with you. If there's a Josh Jacobs owner in a league, is this a guy you would try to trade for going ahead? Are we about to see the breakout coming?
Yeah, 100%. This offense is so concentrated. We saw kind of what Aiden O'Connell, a fifth-year rookie quarterback, starting for this team meant. And that kind of translated to this was still a hyper-concentrated offense between Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs. Jacobs kind of stepped into that receiving role to alleviate some of the inefficiencies on the ground. We'll just put it like that. But what you're looking for, I mean, the biggest predictor for running back fantasy success is workload. And this is one of the best workloads as far as around the league that we've seen in recent history. I mean, he's not playing like 100% of the offensive snaps like a guy like Zach Moss, but this is a guy that they're going to figure things out. Josh McDaniels is not that dude. A horrible game manager and questionable, we'll say at best, offensive play caller, offensive mind at this point. But this offense, like, I'm just buying Jacoby Myers. I'm just buying Devontae Adams. I'm just buying Josh Jacobs because this offense is more concentrated than any offense we have seen over the last 5-10 seasons. You talk about 3 guys getting 90% of the offensive opportunities week in and week out. That's something that I'm just going to buy.
Yeah, Mark, can you bring up those players? So I'll toss this one to Cody. Good players on bad teams. Bad players on good teams. You're going after those guys. So good players on bad teams. And you just mentioned those, the studs that they have, Devontae and Josh Jacobs and Jacoby. So you have any of these Raiders in your fantasy formats? They're going to have to be in shootouts if they want to win games. It seems like they're going to have to try and score points. So is it sneaky to maybe try and trade for some of these guys going ahead in fantasy leagues right now, Cody? Can they sustain this?
I don't love trading for Jacobs after an 11 target, 8 reception, 80-yard game, but the usage, as Mark just alluded to, is there. He's now second at running back in rush share and third at running back in target share. He also has more receiving yards than he does rushing yards. So that is also a positive for a guy that came into the league as a perceived 0 in the receiving game. I like Jacobs. I would be in line with trading for him. I just don't want to overpay for a guy that I know is going to get the workload, but has been inefficient. The offensive line has not been great, and the team is also not great. And that's in a bad team with a bad offensive line. I don't really want the running back getting all the carries, but he is getting the receiving work. On the opposite side of that, the receivers, Devontae Adams, I want some Jacoby Myers. I'm going to continue to buy Jacoby Myers everywhere. He's in that 5th year where we saw Devontae Adams take the leap up as a pro in Green Bay. I think that's kind of where Jacoby Myers is as a career. He's learning from Devontae Adams, and in dynasty formats especially, I want Jacoby Myers. But I think in seasonal, it's a guy that if he gets cut, if he gets dropped, I mean, he just had kind of a dud of a football game with only 2 receptions for 33 yards. If he gets dropped, that's a guy that I'd be more in line adding than a Jameson Williams.
And I on the other side of that, obviously they played against the Chargers. The Chargers get the win, but like I have this theory, and this dates back to when Phillip Rivers was there. I have this theory that the Chargers actually have their own secret deal with the NFL where they like contractually need to be in a 1-score game and sweating it out with 2 minutes to go. Like I'd say 14 out of their 16 games a season. Like they have to be in this situation because this game seemed like it was closer than it should have been. I mean, the Raiders threw Aiden O'Connell out there. And I'm sorry, but the buzz cut mustache work is not working for old boy. He looked like he was working at the concession stand, and they're like, "Hey, you want to play quarterback?" Like, I'm sorry, I call it like I see it. Okay, I call it like I see it. Don't love it. So that game, to me at least, it was closer than it maybe should have been. I know they lost Mike Williams, so you look at some of the guys who were supposed to step up there. Cody Palmer he caught that bomb at the end of the game. I think he had right around 80 yards, 77 yards. Eckler hasn't been part of that offense. When Eckler comes back, and let's forget about the defensive injuries, but when Eckler comes back, is this offense a buy? or is this wait and see?
I think it's going to be Keenan Allen was kind of disappointed in this game right after the big game against Minnesota. You expected him to double down against Vegas with no Mike Williams, but he didn't. And you bring up Josh Palmer, who 51 of those 77 yards came on that last play of the game. So he had 26 yards on 7 targets going into there. It was a pretty disappointing game across the board at the wide receiver position. Quentin Johnston didn't do anything. Darius Davis might have been the most impressive player for the Chargers in this game, taking that first carry of the game, 51 yards. But in total, I was pretty disappointed with the receiving room. When Eckler comes back, I think you're just going to see it go right back. And you're not going to see the Stone Smarts, the Isaiah Spillers. You might see a little Darius Davis just because of how dynamic he is. But I think it's going to go right into Eckler, right into Keenan Allen, and then whoever of Palmer or Johnston kind of proves their worth in practice, you're going to see them get most of the targets. And right now that's Palmer with 8 versus Quentin Johnston's 3. But I did want to say this first. Brandon Staley, what are you doing?
What is you doing, baby?
What is you doing? Like what? And like he not only did he eke out the win against Minnesota last week because of some unforeseen stuff on the Kirk Cousins side of it, but he doubles down this week on his own 34-yard line and almost gives it away again. And he's just getting bailed out this time by Asante Samuel. I don't know. I haven't, Mark, have you seen anything? I've never seen it. I don't think I've seen anything like what Brandon Staley's been his, what's the word I'm looking for? The path he's been on since that game. Was it a year ago or 2 years ago when he went for it on his own 25 or something like this, and like in a big game against the Raiders? Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And I understand the analytical side of it, and I think Michael Lombardi explained it best last week on one of his shows was there's analytics and then there's understanding what is else also going on in the game. And the analytics can't always tell you what is exactly the flow of the game and how other people are performing. And it can only tell you the scenario, the preferred scenario, right? So I don't know. I don't. Staley's driving me nuts.
Staley is one of those guys where, I mean, relate it to like the football guy who is analytics only, and that only goes so far. Like, yes, you have to understand in the context of the game, and that's why like Dwayne McFarland, guy who has been harping context matters. Context matters. Like, you have a 5th-round rookie quarterback on the opposite side who hasn't moved the football. Why would you give him the ball with one play to the red zone? I don't know. Brandon Staley is just one of those guys that always thinks okay. I don't want to speak in certainties. He feels like he's one of those guys that always thinks he's right. And that guy is annoying as hell. So that's just the feel I get from Brandon Staley. And he's the hashtag not it as well. When we're talking about offensive minds or game managers, similar to our discussion with Josh McDaniels on the other side of this game. He's just not it. And it's kind of holding back the Chargers and their fan base, and kind of feel bad. So
I think I think like guys like, you guys, smart guys who see what's going on in the game, you question Staley a lot, but he might get a pass in the more bigger mainstream because he's such a nice guy. He's such a nice guy. You see his press conferences. He's so caring and thoughtful. Like, he's such a nice guy.
I want Mike McDaniel, who is going for
yes. I will say with the Staley thing you just brought up, Matt, was McAfee's had Staley on multiple times on his show. And last week, McAfee was like, basically what we just said. He's like, dude, we love you, but what are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you
yes.
doing? Yeah, dude. Like, what
on your own 35, up 7. If you're up 9 and it's like, all right, we're going to try, they can't, one touchdown's not going to do anything, but it's like you're up 7 on your own 35 with 3 minutes to go. It's like, just punt the football. Your defense is going to stop this rookie. Like, Khalil Mack has 6 sacks. I'm pretty sure he probably can get a sack right now if you really said, hey, Khalil, end the game. Like,
this is what happens when AI takes over football. Like everything is played on paper and the percentages and all that. But like in the reality of this situation, the guy who I just said was working a concession stand is not going to go down the field and beat you like that. So the analytics matter, but you also got to play the game in front of you. All right. Before we get to Monday Night Football, a couple quick things. Like I do need to talk about the Bengals again. I just do. I mean, we're talking about 3 total touchdowns. Touchdowns. T. Higgins got a rib fracture. I don't know how much time he's going to miss. I'm sure they could put a flak jacket on him, but like So my question is, besides just benching Burrow, I mean, you're talking about other assets here. You're talking about Jamar Chase, Higgins injured. Do you go after Tyler Boyd? And I will just say straight up, I am not at the point where I believe these guys can no longer play offensive football. I do think they're too talented. So Cody, expand on this for me. Are we selling the Bengals offensive players going forward in fantasy? Are they a hold? Do you try to trade them? What's the thought here?
I'm not selling Chase, especially because now Higgins is going to be out for a couple of weeks. It is interesting to see just like the stats on baseline with Burrow being down 13 percentage points on completion percentage. Well, his yards per attempt, it was completely been cut in half over the last 2 seasons. And his sack percentage went from 9% 2 years ago. It's down to 5%. So his offensive line is actually giving him a little more time. I will say on the defensive side of the ball, the Bengals allowing 5.1 yards per carry, which is the third most, versus last year they allowed the 7th best, 4.2. Their offense, like I said, 4.8 yards per attempt passing. That's below Carolina, the Jets, and the Giants. And that's coming off back-to-back seasons of 8.7 and 7.4 being top 10 and number 1 just 2 years ago. The inefficiencies are ridiculous with Cincinnati right now. And I think Jamar Chase is going to be a guy, he said after the game, I'm always open. You know that. So I think he's going to be, it's kind of like the A.J. Brown thing the last couple of weeks. Like, well, there's this big turmoil. I don't think there's any turmoil there, just like I don't think there's any turmoil with Burrow and Chase. Chase is going to be fine. The thing is now who's going to fill into that T. Higgins role? Is Mixon going to get an upstick in rushing or in the receiving game? Or is it going to be Tyler Boyd that kind of steps up? That's got to be the expectation. But if you're looking deep, Andre Yosivas, a rookie out of Princeton's a guy that you can definitely look at to stash in Dynasty and play. He's played a butt ton on special teams, and he started to get more routes out wide. He had 2 snaps out wide in week 2, 4 in week 3, and 8 in week 4. Andre Yosivas is a 4.43 guy with the same size that T. Higgins brings to the table.
And that's, you mentioned Dynasty formats. They're also it's going to get to the point where they can't afford both Chase and Higgins. So you talk about a stash there. That's a good name to throw out. Mark, I guess I pose the same question to you. If we're not selling Chase, I mean, look, I'm not selling Chase. But you talk about Burrow, Higgins injury. Do you go after Tyler Boyd, Mixon? I mean, what are we doing the rest of the season if we have draft capital invested in this Bengals offense?
First off, I'm not going after Tyler Boyd. His role is highly unlikely to grow with T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. And this is most likely a case of an offense missing one of their 3 primary pieces that now just focuses more on their 2 primary pieces remaining. So Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase holds or buys for me. But when you look at it in the context of what this offense is, and I keep going back to this league-wide shift to a too high base defensive shell. We saw 2 years ago, Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow were both like, oh, we're trying to figure out how we exploit against too high because it gives the quarterback a very static picture pre-snap. And then teams can play quarters, they can play cover 3, they can play all kinds of different press from this too high shell. But the Chiefs, how do they adjust to this too high look? Early last year, they introduced this schemed gadget guy. Started off being Mecole Hardman. They utilize Marquez Valdes-Scantling down the field in these more or less empty routes, but they do that to manipulate a safety. You do that via pre-snap motion. You do that via stuff around the line of scrimmage, and you do that via this downfield Z-type wide receiver role, and then the rest is over to the quarterback. What we've seen from Zach Taylor in Cincinnati is they are not doing anything to exploit too high defensive looks. Joe Burrow, his time to throw is way up. His average intended air yards is now ranked 34th in the league out of 34 qualifying quarterbacks. His fantasy points per game down, obviously. His clean pocket completion rate, and again, Cody talked about the fact that he has more time to throw this year, ranks 29th in the league at 60.8%. So is this an issue of just Joe Burrow is hurt? I don't think so. This is an underlying difficulty with this offense is that they are not doing things, or they weren't until last week, but then they reverted to not doing them again this week. They're not doing things to exploit this too high base shell that's kind of league wide now. And so last week they put Chase in motion. They fed him his career high in slot snaps. He had 6 targets out of the slot last week. So they were doing things. And again, pre-snap motion and getting guys unique looks is a way to exploit against too high. They were doing those things last week. And then they got punched in the face this week and they reverted to, I'm going to go back to what's comfortable. And that's, I'm just going to run Jamar Chase in these standard crossing routes and let him do the magic with the ball in his hands. Zach Taylor is not putting his skill position players in the best position to maximize their talents. He's reliant on those guys just winning, and that's not sustainable.
I made a joke about it, but hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I don't think that the talented players on the Bengals aren't working hard, but I'm not sure their coach is working for them right now. I mean, that seems to be he seems to be the anchor. Maybe he should look in the mirror. So we'll have to wait and see. Real quick, before we get to Monday Night Football, I just want to, and this is selfish, okay? I know we've talked about Puka all season so far. I know he's been the breakout. I know he's on a historic pace here. Cooper Kupp is coming back. There's 2 questions here. Does Puka's stock nosedive with Kupp back in the mix? And the second question is, and this actually relates to Joe Burrow, right? Let's say you have Joe Burrow, he's a fantasy quarterback. Okay, well, I can't trust him right now. Who am I going to look at? Do you go after Stafford in any format here now, Cody? If he's going to have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, if you believe that Nacua can sustain this. So, Cody, quickly on that, there's a lot of Puka owners out there. Should they be worried that Cooper Kupp's return is in?
I'm not worried about Puka. I think it's going to be interesting how they use these two dynamic players. Puka now has the most receptions by a player in his first 5 career games. He's only played in 4 games. When you look at the importance of what Puka's brought into the table for this offense and the consistency that it's brought in with a Matthew Stafford, or I guess the what it has brought into Matthew Stafford in whole, across the field, they're running pretty similar routes, I'd say, to what Puka and Cooper Kupp are bringing to the table. I wouldn't say I'm nervous. I trust McVay to use both guys in the field at the same time and not just use them interchangeable. I think it's going to be interesting what it looks like. I think you've seen the use of the dynamic motion out of Miami that San Francisco is now using and LA is still now using. You've seen Kupp work out of the backfield. You've seen Puka be able to move out of the backfield in jet motion. I think having both of these guys, and this is also assuming that Cooper Kupp is 100%, right? He's coming off of a double hamstring injury the last month and a half. He hasn't played a ton of football. We're just all assuming Cooper Kupp is going to be Cooper Kupp. Like, I don't even know if that's a thing. It could be just the Puka Nacua show with Cooper Kupp playing, 50, 60%, maybe 40, 50, 60% the first couple of weeks. I'm fully trusting what we've seen from Puka Nacua because he's playing in a similar role to what Kupp did. And even if Kupp comes back, I think it's going to be a twisted dynamic where these guys are going to, Higbee had 11 targets this last week. I could definitely see Higbee come down and you just see both Kupp and Nacua out there getting 10 plus targets on a weekly basis. To answer the real question, Matthew Stafford, can you trust that to continue to work? Of course. Matthew Stafford is a great quarterback. The question is the health. He had a hip injury this week. He's had a back injury coming into the season. Father Time's undefeated. That's the only question I have with Matthew Stafford. You're muted.
Got you muted. All right. I'll go do a quick spiel about what the Rams are here. Kyle Shanahan had a press conference this past week where he was talking about how the league is still a copycat league. And we look at the trajectory of where the league is right now. We're in a down scoring portion of kind of the standard cycle of league scoring. Back in 2020, teams were scoring 2.88 touchdowns per game. Last year, that was down to 2.48. This year, at the beginning of the year, it's down to 2.3. So teams are per team, 2.3 offensive touchdowns per game. Now, you look at what teams are doing to exploit now this like defensive philosophy of a too high shell. Mike McDaniel is actually the guy that's leading the charge here. He is doing things that are outside the normal route tree. He is doing some crazy outside zone, inside zone gap run blocking schemes. And you look at Sean McVay and you look at Kyle Shanahan, and they're actually pulling pieces, which is interesting because they're all from the same coaching tree. They're actually pulling pieces from Mike McDaniel in Miami. And one of the like most important pieces to that offensive scheme is this motion man. The motion man in Miami for Mike McDaniel is Tyreek Hill. The motion man for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco is Deebo Samuel. The motion man for Sean McVay in Los Angeles is Tutu Atwell. So how does that kind of come together now that they have very defined roles with Cooper Kupp coming back? Because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are playing the similar role in this offense. So does that mean that they lose their downfield Z-type safety manipulator in Van Jefferson when Cooper Kupp comes back? I don't know, but I don't see how you can remove Tutu Atwell's role in this offense, which is akin to Deebo Samuel, how he's being utilized. So I don't know what that's going to look like when they come back, when Cooper Kupp comes back. But I would guess, and we've talked about this before, I would guess that means that Van Jefferson is the odd man out. But now you're kind of losing this like downfield field stretcher type of role. So how does that play in? Kyle Shanahan has figured it out because Brandon Ayuk is not necessarily just this downfield guy. But I would think that we're going to see Puka, Tutu, and Cooper Kupp on the field together for the majority of the snaps here. And it's likely going to be those three as the primary contributors, with Kyron Williams and Tyler Higbee's work through the air kind of being the thing that goes here.
Well, audio problems are certainly something, aren't they? I don't know if you guys got me back now, but boy, do I love technology. We had a great show up until that point right there, but I still think it was really good with you guys giving your analysis. I just wish my technology cooperated. All right, so we only have a minute left. We have a Monday Night Football game tonight, Seahawks and the Giants. Real quick, Mark, is this a get-right game for the Giants? Are you putting Daniel Jones and Giants offense in any of your DFS lineups?
Yeah, I think so. Seattle Seahawks are the only team in the league to allow a red zone touchdown on every opponent red zone drive this year. So that is interesting. So yeah, I have no doubt that we're going to see a more high-scoring affair this week. And I'm plugging Daniel Jones primarily if I got him. Obviously, it's late week, but playing Daniel Jones and playing Kenneth Walker on the other side.
A Darren Waller breakout. All right, guys, thanks for rolling with the punches with the technology issues. We'll see you after week 5. You guys are the smartest guys, at least in this room. So thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Monday. And thank you to everybody for watching. Have a great Monday Night Football.